All right. So today, the title of the message is Promise Keepers, and we're going to stay in our series, Camping with Jesus. And we're going to open up our Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. We're going to jump right into it, and let's get going with verse 33. And it says this, "Again, you have heard it said that to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil." Now, I'm not sure how many of you are old enough to remember Promise Keepers as an organization. How many of you can remember that, Promise Keepers? Now, I remember I have these phenomenal memories going to stadiums that were completely jammed full of men singing and praising God and learning to be a promise keeper, to keep their promises in the name of Jesus. It was an awesome experience. In fact, I have this picture of me in Washington, D.C. at Promise Keepers. Would you put that up? Yeah. So I don't know if you can see me or not. I'm the one on the left. And I'm pretty sure I was waving at the camera there just left of the Washington Monument. But Promise Keepers has been a very big part of my life. I can see some of you are looking up there going, I don't get it. I can't see him. The people are really tiny, and I really am in the picture. It's just we're really tiny dots in there. You see, it's funny because today it seems like keeping promises seems to be very conditional today. Do you know what I'm talking about? Meaning that it's very culturally acceptable to not keep promises if certain set of criteria is met. I mean, it's like, well, we have the promises we keep, and then there's, well, I didn't really mean it. It reminds me of a principle I've talked about a few times, which we seem to have two types of Christians in our world. It is the only if Christians and the even if Christians. You see, the only if Christian says, I will serve the Lord only if the following conditions are met. Now, of course, they would never say that out loud. That'd be ridiculous. But they act this way. They serve the Lord if he's answering prayers. They serve the Lord if conditions are favorable. They serve the Lord if they're in the mood. They serve the Lord if going to church is something they're interested in doing. They serve the Lord if this and if that, but only if this and if that. The even if Christian says, I will serve the Lord even if no conditions are ever met. No matter what happens, no matter what doesn't happen, even if all hell breaks loose, I will serve the Lord. You see, for the only if Christians, God is constantly expected to meet the burden of proof. You know what I'm saying? It's like we're constantly trying to get God to prove himself to us as if we're the jury, God's on trial, and he needs to prove that he's really real. The burden of proof is on him. The only if Christians, the ones that say, I will serve God if, they're putting the burden of proof on God to continuously, and I'm telling you, for most of these kinds of people, it's not a one-time thing. God can part the Red Sea, and that'll hold them over for a little while. But then before long, they're expecting God to do it again. The burden of proof is on God to prove that he's real. The burden is on him to demonstrate and re-demonstrate his love for them through feelings, signs, and wonders, and goosebumps on the back of their neck, and answered prayer. The burden of proof is constantly on God to prove he's really real for the only if people. For the even if Christian, the burden of proof is on us to prove our love, our faith, and loyalty to God. They will say, even if I don't see another sign, even if I don't get another miracle, even if I never even have another answer to prayer, even if my world falls apart, even if all of the worst happens, I will still serve the Lord. This is also the way some people keep promises. Have you met these people? If you haven't, maybe you're the people somebody else has met. Their word is only as good as their motivation in a given moment. While this may seem like a new problem, it really isn't. It is a human problem. Jesus knows this, and he addresses it here. Now, one of the things that I think is so powerful about this, and I want you to catch it, is that none of these different conversations that we've had, today, last week, the week before, none of these were given in isolation, but all of them were part of a complete narrative that Jesus is giving in the Sermon on the Mount. So let's look at what Jesus has said so far. This is a little bit of a review. But week 1, we talked about the Beatitudes, and Jesus turns what it means to be blessed completely upside down. Everything that people think they understand about a blessing, the things that we would call a blessing today in our culture, that's not what Jesus was talking about. He was talking about things that most of us would not want, that we would think of as a negative thing, that we would not want to have happen in our life. And Jesus was saying, this is a blessing. Blessed are you when some of the worst things in your life ever happen. So he turns the idea of being blessed completely upside down. Then he talks about being salt and light, and that what we do matters. Did you hear me today? Being salt and light was not just about being a light for people to see and flavor to the world. That's not what that conversation was about. At least it's not what it was exclusively about. Jesus is saying that what we do matters. It has an impact. The things that you and I do, not just the memes we share, not just the t-shirts we wear, but the actions that we take in our life, they have an impact on the world around us, and they matter. So that's what he was saying when he talked about salt and light. Then he talked about the law, and everybody loved that conversation. We spent 3 weeks talking about Jesus and the law from Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 24 verses. Took us 3 weeks to get through it. Jesus says he did not come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Now, if you think that I'm saying that the law is no longer relevant or applicable to our lives, then you're not hearing me. However, if you think that keeping the law in any way, shape, or form somehow makes you righteous in the eyes of God, well, then you're not hearing Jesus. That's what he was talking about with the law. Then we talked about anger. He said if you thought the line was at murdering people, so therefore it didn't matter how angry you were, as long as you didn't actually kill anybody, you thought you were okay. But Jesus said, but I say, if you're even angry at somebody, if you call somebody an idiot, if you call people names, you're in danger of hell. Then we talked about lust, and Jesus said, you thought adultery was the line, but he said, but I say, that if we even look at somebody with lustful intent, we've committed adultery in our hearts. And then we talked about this last week, was marriage and divorce, where Jesus said, you thought if you wanted a divorce, you just needed to give a certificate of divorce. But I say that divorce is adultery. And we talked all about sexual immorality and what that is. In fact, I've had a couple people refer to last week's sermon as, quote, the sex talk. So if you missed that, you can go to our website. I bet you that one's going to get a lot more hits than normal ones do, just because they said that. So then what I want you to see is that what these issues were just one right after another in the conversation that Jesus is having with these people, and then he immediately talks about keeping your word. So let's look at this more closely at Matthew chapter 5, verse 33. It says, again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear. Everybody say swear. Shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. Now we're going to stop right there. I want you to look at this, because just like he did with murder and anger and lust and marriage, Jesus is saying, you thought the line was over here, but I'm going to tell you that it's somewhere else. Now, he says that you thought you had to say if you do not swear falsely. In other words, what he's saying is, you thought the line was that if you swear, you need to keep your word. In other words, if you're not at the swear level, if your commitment to what you're saying is not at that level, well, then maybe it's okay to not keep your word. But if you're at the triple dog dare of promise keeping, the swear, well, then you need to keep your word. Meaning that if you're not at the level of swearing, then you did not necessarily have to keep your word. In other words, we thought that it was not necessarily binding if we were at another level. The words swear falsely come from the word epiorkeo, which means to break an oath. So what existed in the people, much like the people today, is we have degrees of honesty, or at least degrees of commitment to our honesty. Do you understand what I'm saying? I mean, it's not necessarily that we have degrees of honesty, but we have degrees of commitment to our honesty. In other words, we have these different levels. Like, well, this level's binding, this level is kind of binding, and this level really doesn't have any teeth to it at all. At the top was an oath or swearing, which basically was a promise you really, really mean. When I was a kid growing up, I distinctly remember 3 levels of commitment to keeping your own word. Did you guys have this too? But I remember when I was a kid, there was there was just saying it. Yeah, I'm going to be there later today. Yeah, I'll be there. And that just saying it without the words I promise or I swear basically meant nothing. It means that, well, at this moment I intend to be there, but at that moment, who knows? At this moment I'm saying I'm kind of interested, but pretty much if anything else happens to take me away from that, I'm probably not going to be there. Then there was the promise, which was binding but had loopholes. I promise to be there means that you're serious, you're making a commitment, but we all understand that it's only a promise, and therefore if something important comes up, I will be released from this obligation. And then there was swearing, which was the highest level of commitment that we had. Am I the only one? Did other people have these levels of commitment when they were kids? Or maybe today? It's like when you really mean something, you say, I swear. You got to believe me. I swear I'm going to be there. Now think about the logic behind this. The only reason we would ever have to use the phrase I swear is because the phrase I will be there isn't good enough. Doesn't mean enough, isn't reliable enough. It means there's a level of commitment that's higher because this other level that has been abused, neglected, or abandoned is no longer very meaningful. I don't know that it's all that different today, to be honest with you. Maybe we've changed the words and the phrases a little bit, but I think we all, or that our culture, not you of course, but our culture in general today has different levels of commitment. For example, have you ever heard someone say they would be somewhere and then they didn't show up? Raise your hand if you've ever had that happen to you. Yeah, I think everybody has. You know, and of course we're talking about not counting circumstances beyond their control. None of this is meant to, override things we would all understand. This is about keeping your word, not preventing the uncontrollable from happening. How about this? How many of you know someone who has a reputation for not showing up? Man, I didn't even ask for hands. I'm like, yeah, I know that person. There's like, heck yeah, I know who you're talking about. Or how about has a reputation for not showing up on time? Anybody know those people? I'm not even going to look around. Like, you were looking right at me. I'm not even going to look. I know people that when I see or hear that they are committed to something, and this is so true. Everybody can tell you it's the truth. Then I'm like, well, I give that a 50-50 at best. Whether or not they're actually going to come, because we know that, anything might come up, and, anything from a sniffle to Netflix just released something. We don't know. I don't know if it's going to keep them from coming to that, whether or not they're going to be there. I think we all know people like that. Now let me ask you a question. Is that a big deal? Is it a problem? Or is it just a cute little thing that people do? I mean, really, I'm asking, you don't have to tell me, just seriously think about that. Is that an issue? Is it a problem in the eyes of God? So now let's look at this in verse 34. Now what I'm going to do is with verse 34 and 37, I'm not changing the scripture, so you don't have to accuse me of heresy here, but I'm putting the beginning and the end of this together so you can see it. We'll put the middle back in a minute. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all. Verse 37, let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this, listen to that line, anything more than this comes from evil. Jesus is saying that anything more than a simple yes or no comes from evil. Now, listen, I would be just as guilty as most anybody in here of saying things like, I promise. Now, I guarantee, I may not use the words I swear. That's not something I would normally say. But there are ways that I may add to the commitment to the commitment. Does that make sense? Ways that I might to emphasize that I really, really, really mean what I'm saying right now. And so what Jesus is saying to all of us is that the necessity for us to add weight to our commitments comes from evil. That's where it comes from. It comes from evil. It comes from evil because the only reason different levels of honesty are necessary is because we don't see a problem with breaking our word when it's just our word. You ever heard the expression, we judge others by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our intentions? This never will be truer than it will be in this context right here. When we say, I will do, I will be, I will go, or whatever it is we're committing to do, whatever it is we're giving our word towards, generally speaking, we understand that to mean is we intend to do this. We intend to do that. But we leave within ourselves the room to change that intention at any point in time. And we can decide later that, well, I no longer intended it. I no longer feel like it. I no longer want to. I am no longer motivated to do that. Therefore, we don't see that as having broken the word or the commitment. That's why Jesus is saying that anything more than a simple yes or no comes from evil, because it becomes necessary. Think about this. The only reason it is ever necessary for me to add any expression to any commitment is because without that addition, it wouldn't mean anything, because it's been so easily broken in the past. We just as a culture, as a human culture, not as even a modern culture, but just as a human culture, we just don't see a problem with breaking our word. We don't see a problem with it. We don't have an issue with it. We think that our word commitments are only limited to the way we feel right now. When was the last time you bought a house? Let me just ask you a question you can respond to. How many of you had to sign your name more than once the last time you bought a house? How many had to sign your name more than 50 times? Can I just go off script here for a minute? Is this not the most ridiculous thing that we have in modern society? You sit down to buy the biggest purchase that the vast majority of us will ever make with a stack of paper. A stack. You don't even read the bold. You don't read the little sticker that says sign here. You don't even read the word sign here. You see the sticker and you scribble a line. You just want this over with. You want my kids, you want my grandkids, you want the oil under my property. I don't care. I just want to get out of here. You sign your name over and over. You have no idea what you're signing. And then there's somebody on the other side of the desk giving you all kinds of probably false assurances that this is completely legitimate and you don't need to worry about any of this. Are you with me today? We sign that over and over. We initial on line 13. We sign that page, and the other person's got to sign the other side of it. All of it to add weight to a commitment that's lost weight because of broken commitments. See, we just don't see a problem with breaking our word. We have these little things in our wallets called credit cards. Can you imagine how much differently America would treat debt? You took that little thing out of your wallet, and instead of just swiping it, punching in a code and taking your 900-inch TV back to your 400-inch apartment, imagine that you had to do at the end of the transaction, you had to put your hand over your heart, you had to place one hand on the Bible and said, I swear I will pay back every dollar that I'm borrowing today plus the obnoxious interest that the company feels entitled to charge me. Can you imagine that every time you borrowed money, you had to put your hand over your heart, your hand on the Bible, and say the words, I swear to pay back this money? I'm just guessing we might borrow less. I sure hope. I might be wrong about that, but I sure hope we'd pay back better. Do you know why we have to sign so many times on all these documents? Because somebody before us didn't keep their word. So some lawyer somewhere had to say, well, okay, for that instance, we need to make sure they acknowledge that this is the condition. And it becomes to such an obnoxious point, the amount of paperwork, that nobody reads any of it. Am I right? Did you read the paperwork the last time you bought a house? Did you read the paperwork the last time you bought a car? Did you read the paperwork the last time you bought an extension cord and there were 1,800 warning labels in print so small that you would need an electron microscope to read the print on that label, which apparently is there to protect me? And if I don't have this information, I am in grave danger. But the print is so small that not one human on this earth knows what's written on those labels. All of it exists in a culture where people cannot, do not, and choose not to keep their word. It's the last time you bought a gas can. You know, a gas can used to be a cheap purchase. Now it's an investment. Apparently, our culture has lost the insight to know that gas is flammable. Did you know this? This is a dangerous liquid. Did you know that if you smoke a cigarette next to a gas can, it might blow up? Did you know that? Well, the gas can manufacturers don't think you know that. So they got to there are so many warnings on the side of a gas can, and they have made this valve so it's completely impossible for you to get gas out of it except when and only if you don't need it and there's already gas in something else. It is impossible to use a modern gas can because it has been made so safe and so protected from people who do not understand that gas is apparently dangerous. Because we live in a culture where we can't keep our word. We don't understand how this stuff works. So we have to invent new ways of committing to our word to make it mean more than if we just said, I'll do it. I'll be there. We have to create new ways. That's what the Pharisees did. They loved to do this. In fact, they liked to consider the weight of their word next to the weight of whatever they were swearing against. So in other words, they said, I swear by this old abandoned sandal here on the side of the road. That word would not mean very much because the weight of what they are swearing it on doesn't mean anything. So they had different levels of saying, this is something I really, 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 really mean. This is something I just really mean. Here's something I kind of mean. And here's something that doesn't matter much at all. See, so now let's go back and let's put the middle in to these verses. So back in verse 33, do not take an oath at all either. So let's look at these as a list. Either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king, and do not take an oath by your head. For you cannot make one hair white or black. And I know there's people right now saying, oh, yes, I can. Yes, you can buy the bottle and you can change your hair color now, but you're not actually making it that way. Look at these levels. Heaven, the throne of God, earth, God's footstool, Jerusalem in your head. Look at all these different levels. The reason Jesus is giving us this list specifically is because these were the things that the Pharisees liked to swear by. They were famous for it. They liked to swear according to these different things. And Jesus is saying that anything other than a simple yes or no comes from evil. Is it really that different today? I don't think it really is. Have you ever heard someone swear on their own life? I swear on my life. And that means they really, really mean it. I hope it does. I hope they really, really mean it. How about this one? Have you ever heard someone swear on their mother's grave? I think that one's used more for effect than reality. I don't even know what that means. What happens if you break that promise? I'm not sure. I hope, thankfully my mother's still with us. Hi, Mom, I love you. But should my mom pass and have a grave, I would hate to think that if I break that promise, they're going to dig her up. That would be really weird. So I don't know exactly what you achieve by swearing on your mother's grave, but we still to this day in this moment have people who swear by different things. But Jesus says that anything other than a simple yes or no comes from evil. You see, this is what being salt and light is all about. That's what it is. Remember that this was all together. This was all part of the same conversation. You and I were talking about salt and light weeks ago, but Jesus was talking about it to these people, hearing about their oaths and keeping their promises just moments ago. Look at what he said in chapter 5, verse 16. In this way, let your light shine before others so they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. These are the good works he was talking about. Keeping your promises, keeping your word. Just being able to say, I will be there, and have somebody know, I have no doubt at all, 100%, that they will be there. Listen, we think it's funny, and we may know people that are maybe chronically late, or maybe even habitually no-showers. I certainly know some. But we also know people who all they have to do is say, I'll be there, and you know they're going to be there. Never even crosses your mind. In fact, if they're even a few minutes late, you begin to fear the worst. Because you know it would be so completely unlike them to not be somewhere when they said they would be there. That's the good works that Jesus is talking about. It's not the only good works he's talking about, but these are the good works. He's not saying just be a good person, not just be your own version of a good person, not just do what you think is being a good person. He's saying be a person who keeps their word. In other words, let them see you keep your word. Let them see you show up when you said you would show up. Let them see you honor your marriage vows. Did you know that was a promise? When you walked down an aisle much like this one and you stood there in your tuxedo or in your pretty white, overly priced dress, and you stood there in front of a preacher. How many of you remember your vows Yeah, nobody does. We just say these because we think we're supposed to. But what you were really doing that day is you were saying, I give my word to you. And she was saying, I won't do the high falsetto voice. Okay, I will. I give my word to you. No. That's what was happening right there. And yet today, person after person sees those words that were given as something that can be dismissed if circumstances change, if motivation change, if our interest levels change. This was the salt and light Jesus was talking about. To be a person who keeps the word. Let people see you do what you say you will do. Let people see you pay the debts you owe. Let them see you be an even if kind of person. The kind of person that says, even if things are difficult, even if things are hard, even if things are miserable and uncomfortable, even if, I will be true to my word. Because this world is full of only if people. People who will keep their word if and only if they still want to when the time comes. Even if all hell breaks loose in your life, are you going to serve God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your mind, and all of your strength? Let's be the even if kind of people that serve God no matter what.